Good morning, everybody. This is Books for Breakfast, a podcast where we talk about books and writing. I'm Enda Wiley.
And I'm Peter Sir.
And you're very welcome to this morning's special, a Books for Breakfast video podcast for Mountains to Sea Festival 2021. It's great to be here, isn't it, Peter?
It's very good. Coffee's made and the toast is on and the books are on the table.
Great.
And today, we've not just one but two guests joining us, and both novelists, both well up to for chatting to us about their books and also for rising to the Toaster Challenge and talking about a book that they each kind of love for about 2 or 3 minutes, as long as it takes to make the proverbial slice of toast. So Laura McKenna and Conor OCallaghan, you're both very welcome.
Yeah, very welcome. And we don't mind one bit either, Peter, if the toast gets a bit burnt. Isn't that right? Well, I'm going to start with you, Laura, your debut novel, Words to Shape My Name. I have it here. It's just been published by New Island Books. Congratulations. And just to give everybody listening some background to you, Laura. Laura is a writer of fiction and poetry. She's worked for many years as a child psychiatrist. Words to Shape My Name, her novel, was longlisted for the 2019 Bath Novel Award, and it formed the creative element of her PhD in creative writing, awarded from UCC in 2019. So you've been busy, Laura. Laura has also been twice nominated for a Hennessy Literary Award and a Forward Prize for Irish Writing. And we're really delighted that Laura is joining the breakfast table today to talk about her new, ambitious and epic novel, Words to Shape My Name. It's inspired by true events. This is a powerful story of failure, of hope and resilience. It traverses continents and 2 centuries, and it has at its core the unbreakable bond between the Irish rebel Lord Edward Fitzgerald and his black manservant Tony Small. And it's come with huge endorsements. Colin McCann, Joseph O'Connor, and Hilary Mantel has said of the book, "This is an ambitious and vital novel with an epic sweep, a complex, timely story about liberty, equality, identity. This book is an act of salvage." Some praise, Laura. And of course, it is interesting, we have to say, that Peter Sir is here with us today, whose namesake captured Lord Edward Fitzgerald. So let's hope, Laura, that he's not actually related to
He was a lovely man, really, you know.
Oh, I know. Let's just hope, Peter, that you aren't actually related to him. Anyway, Laura, congratulations on Words to Shape My Name, which I've really enjoyed it. So to start off with, it's a really expansive novel. It's well over 300 pages. The first half, before we even get to revolutionary Ireland, it covers the sprawling career of Lord Edward Fitzgerald. It took him across much of Europe, Canada, America, and always with him his faithful Tony, his black male servant, the runaway slave who saved his life in 1781 in North America. And Laura, it's really an amazing story, which I think is not that widely known. And I think you have, as Hilary Mantel said, you've salvaged it. Now, I know you credited Stella Tilliard's 1997 biography of Lord Edward Fitzgerald for initially leading you to the life of Tony Small. But I was just wondering, what was it about this first encounter with his story that compelled you to go on to research his life? And as we know, writing a novel isn't, about research so much, it's about so much more, but to actually write a novel about it from there.
Well, what compelled me, I think, was the nature of the story. It's such an interesting one, this relationship between these two men from such completely different backgrounds. And when I moved sort of from Stella Tilliard's biography on to reading some of the letters, it was the way in which I suppose Tony's conveyed in the letters, the Fitzgerald letters, not just from Edward himself, but he's mentioned in much of the family correspondence. So it was clear he had a really big part in their family, and his position changed from being a groom and a manservant really to being a travelling companion and friend, very much a friend, by the end of their 17 years together. And I just began to wonder what it was like for Tony Small, for this man who had been enslaved in South Carolina, to come to Ireland, to actually live in Ireland, what that would have been like for him. I mean, there were many intriguing things about it, but that's what kind of pressed me on to find out about him and his family.
Things. And of course, you said of your novel that research and facts are only really part of the story, that there's always gaps. And in the gaps, you said, lie the unknowable of mystery and possibility. And I really think your book is magnificent at filling in those gaps by really imagining that close pond between these two men who were together for 17 years. It's an amazing amount of time. But as you said, they're two very different people. Tony is quiet. He doesn't speak much. Lord Edward Fitzgerald says Tony is a wise man holding his judgment. And Fitzgerald, on the other hand, is worldly and affable. He's a man of impulse. As a novelist, was it hard to balance these very two different personalities while also, I suppose, ensuring that the reader gets that their bond is unbreakable and it is enduring?
I think it was difficult in lots of ways. I mean, not just because of the disparity in their personalities, but of course, trying to pay sort of ethical attention to how Tony Small himself was portrayed. So that was always an issue. But and also the fact that Edward was a very larger-than-life character himself. You know, he was very charismatic. But I just, at the same time, I felt that Tony and his personality was a good foil for Edward. And I think Edward, in real life, almost tried out different opinions on Tony. He used him as a sounding board, and that comes across in the letters. So in a way, I had not quite permission, but I had hints there that allowed me to portray Tony in this way. And, you know, for various reasons, the official narrative that I use in it, I didn't want that to be the only version of Tony, because I wanted some of his real self to come across, which I hope did.
And with great ease as well, Laura, so well done. Speaking about form as well in the novel, you use a lot of very inventive narrative techniques. Lord Edward Fitzgerald's sister, Lady Lucy, has asked Tony to write a narrative, an account of his life with Fitzgerald to save her brother's reputation. So there's sections in italics where Tony's quite formally writing. There's you've also inserted kind of cranky footnotes now and then from Lady Lucy. Not always cranky, but I did enjoy when she was getting a bit kind of querulous. And then there's the less formal third-person narration in Tony's own voice. And there's clever scribbles in the book where we witness the editing of the account. I loved all those. And I was wondering, why did you choose these techniques as opposed to going for a more traditional kind of linear approach?
I think they evolved. I mean, not all of those were there in the first few drafts. I always had the idea of doing this as a sort of coerced narrative. But as I said already, I didn't want that to be Tony's only voice, because then he's sort of, you know, it would be far too formal and far too constrained. So because Lucy was the editor, the commissioning editor, that gave her the opportunity to write. And I also felt it gave a different view of history and how narratives can be changed over time, depending on who's basically holding the purse strings, which was Lucy. And then subsequently, the voice of Harriet came in, and that added another strand and also shows another way, the way in which retrospective memories can be altered.
Another of your big concerns in the novel is slavery and what exactly it means to be free. And there's a particularly memorable scene in St. Louis where the horror of slavery is revealed in the slave trader's house. And there's a doctor that Tony meets in New Orleans who quotes John Locke and says, "Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has a right to but himself." Can you talk a bit about the importance of the idea of slavery and freedom in your book?
I think, you know, there's all different kinds of freedom. And for Tony, it was about his personal freedom, as I said, the freedom of that body not to be used and abused by another person. And that, you know, that was his main view of freedom. And then he meets Lord Edward, who turns out to have, you know, far more wide-ranging ideals about the meaning of freedom. It's kind of a national freedom, a political and a financial freedom. So it was interesting to kind of put these two things together, I think. And also at the end of the novel, there's a turn when, of course, Fitzgerald himself ends up losing his own personal freedom. So it kind of came full circle at that point.
And it's interesting that your PhD in creative writing focused on the ethics and the aesthetic of voice in fiction. And as you said earlier, in this novel, we have so many voices coming into play. You've Lady Lucy, you've Tony's kind of more reticent voice, Lord Edward's, as you said, full of kind of conviction and confidence. And then you have the wonderful Harriet or Etty Small, Tony's feisty, spirited daughter. You must have enjoyed the challenge of writing these different voices, did you?
Oh, I really did, actually. Yeah, really. And Harriet, I suppose, was really enjoyable because she just came to me after reading a transcript of her voice at an Old Bailey, in an Old Bailey record. And from then, she just had to be in it. And she wrote, literally, her voice just wrote itself almost.
There's a great energy to the beginning of this book, which is kind of carried through then. I think, I have to admit, Laura, she is actually my favourite character.
I think she might be mine too, actually.
So, listen, this has been great chatting to you. And the novel is finished. It's doing well. It's well on its way. It's been getting absolutely fantastic responses. But I don't know if you're a bit superstitious about answering this question, but have you got a new project that you're working on? I know some writers don't like to talk about that kind of thing, but have you something in the pipeline?
Oh, I do. Although, in a way, talking about it is problematic because I've not written that much of it. But I've done a lot of research. Right. It's historical again, and it's about a real woman in the early 19th century who crossed paths with many very famous people.
It does sound interesting anyway. And, so we were speaking of voices, Laura, and you've got an extract now that I know you want to read for us, where we actually hear the wonderful Etty Small, and there's a creature in it. I won't give anything away, but it's a really memorable scene. So I'd love to hear it, Laura.
Here we go. So Lady Lucy didn't know everything, didn't remember everything. She got it wrong about the Indian tribe, what gave Lord Edward his great honour, making him chief. I remember the name because Baba told me about it. It were the Bear tribe, and he told me that story the day I came home from the market, filled with fear and terror on account of a dancing bear. He were trying to make me feel better, but it never worked, for that bear is still roaring somewhere in my memory, still giving off its stink, its misery. It were at a market near Piccadilly, and Ma and I were making our way through the stalls when I saw the bear. He were roped about the neck and muzzle. I stopped to gawp. A dancing bear, I'd say he was. But perhaps he didn't have a fancy for the horn players' music or the crowd that day, for he would not dance. Stayed on all fours, no matter how the rope man shouted and prodded him. The crowd became jaded by his tired shuffling, and they too set about provoking him, jeering, jabbing him with sticks. I heard Ma's voice calling to me just as he reared up, but I could no more have moved than I could have stuck him with a knife. Terrifying he were, all matted fur and huge leathered paws with long, long curved claws. The crowd seemed to drop back from me. I heard Ma again shouting, "Etty, run," and the bear man cursing as he grappled with the rope. I were standing right in the dark shadow of the beast. Couldn't help but stare up at him, at his jaw working against the rope in a froth of spittle. I could smell the suffering pelt of him, feel his muffled roar juddering along my bones, the blast of his raging breath. Then it were over, the trance broken by Ma hugging and half slapping me, berating me, and then comforting me with her Irish words. "Why don't you listen to me, Avurni Nestor?" And the bear was backing away, the rope man beating him with a stumpy whip. The crowd spread like spilt milk, draining away into craps and gaps. It were over. Some memories never leave you. Seems they're carved into your body, that bear, that smell, that look. Saw it years later in my own son when I got my last glimpse of him as he tramped up the gangplank of the Augusta Jessie. He turned round when he reached the top, and the look in his eyes set my bones shuddering just as that bear did.
That was great to hear. So that's Laura McKenna reading Words to Shape My Name. Absolutely brilliant. And now I think, Laura, if you're up for it, it's time for the Toaster Challenge, where you get to talk about a book that you love for as long as it takes to make a slice of toast. Now, some listeners to Books for Breakfast so far have asked, is there a toaster? And actually, there is a toaster. So Peter is now going to hold it up. There it is, a lovely bright red toaster. So yes, it does exist. And Peter's going to put the bread in. Are you ready, Peter? And we're going to click it down. We're going to count you in, Laura. We're really looking forward to hearing what book you've chosen today. So 1, 2, 3, and off you go.
So the book I've chosen is A Dry White Season by Andre Brink, which was published in 1979. And I read it in my early 20s when I was sort of interested in South African fiction. And this book is actually set in the apartheid era in the mid-70s, just before the Soweto riots. And it focuses on one man in particular. So it's kind of a white Afrikaner gaze. This is Ben du Toit. He's a teacher. He's married with 3 children. He has a reasonably content life, though he's not particularly happy. And he's aware of the sense that his life might have more meaning, and he just has to wait for the moment when he'll be called upon. But of course, there isn't a particular moment. There's just a sort of drip when he's pulled into the life of Gordon Ngobeni, who's a black cleaner in the school where Ben teaches. And first of all, Gordon's son is killed in police custody, and shortly afterwards, Gordon himself is taken by the special branch, and he also ends up dead. So Ben wishes to help, but he also wishes to believe in the system and in justice. And when his pursuit of that comes to nothing, he becomes aware of, his own vulnerability and the forces of the state and of surveillance and violence. The narrative is bookended by a nameless narrator who has Ben's papers in his possession. And these consist of Ben's journal, but also court records and post-mortem things and official documents. And there's also a moment in the novel when Ben goes into the special branch building, and it's a moment of great tension, and it's relayed in the second person, which really makes the reader almost complicit in it. And Brink has a real way with describing buildings and public spaces in a way that he uses to convey mood, but also for moments of self-revelation. So this is a book about knowing and not knowing. Ben realises he doesn't really know his wife, nor she him. And when he visits the township, he realises that though he called Gordon a friend, he didn't know him at all and had no idea of what his life was like. So it's about living alongside other lives, but never crossing over, and about looking away, really, rather than seeing. And this kind of this Afrikaner, white Afrikaner viewpoint is relayed through the eyes of Ben's friends and his work colleagues and his family. None of these are actually monsters per se, but they all very much believe in the rightness and deservedness of their way of life and wish to keep it that way. So the book shows the high price that there is to pay for not looking away. And it's not just about betrayal and violence or abandonment, but also, as is shown with another character, Melanie, who's a journalist, she loses her marriage, and when she takes on dangerous assignments, she ends up in gang raped. And this is kind of an uneasy theme in the novel, that the price for having a conscience is a sort of body sacrifice. And from the beginning, the reader knows that Ben has paid the highest price, and it's relayed in kind of newspaper reports as part of an endless list that has already occurred of disappearances and murders in Ben's pursuit of the truth. So this kind of mirrors, or I feel it mirrors, the way it must have been for people living in that environment. An endless list of disappearances kind of numbs your sensibilities and your conscience. So the book is about paying attention, and the price of not looking and looking away is to jeopardize your humanity. Ta-da!
the toast is not
The
burnt.
toast is done. Yeah.
It's done, not burnt. So well done. That was great to hear you talking about Andre Brink's novel, A Dry White Season. Amazing to think it was first published in 1979, but it's still really, from listening to you there, as powerful and as relevant as ever, I think. I remember it had a really kind of passionate, it seemed to me, when I read it at the time, it was very passionate about social justice, and that kind of passion puts me in mind of Lord Edward Fitzgerald. So it's no surprise to me, Laura, that you actually chose that book. But thanks for bringing that book back to the fore. An amazing writer. And it was great to chat to you there. So now I think we're going to hand it over to the men and to Peter and Conor. And it'll be interesting to hear about Conor's book too. But thanks, Laura. Thanks for joining us. Great.
Indeed. Thanks for that, Laura. And congratulations again on the book. And turning to Conor, it's great to have you here, Conor. Conor's originally from Dundalk, and he now divides his time between Dublin and the north of England. His critically acclaimed first novel, Nothing on Earth, was published by Doubleday Ireland back in 2016, and it got, I have to say, rave reviews. John Banville said of it that it's as fine as it's frightening. It was also described in the Times, Irish Times, as extraordinary, low key, and pitch perfect. But I suppose Enda and I have also known Conor over the years as a poet. He's published 5 books of poetry at Gallery Press, including The History of Rain, Seatown, Fiction, which was shortlisted for the Irish Times Poetry Now Award, The Sun King, which was a Poetry Book Society recommendation, Streaming, which came out in 2017. So Conor's also the recipient of a number of awards: Patrick Cavan Award for his first collection, Rooney Prize Special Award, Times Educational Fellowship, Bess Hooken Prize for Poetry in 2007, shortlisted for Forward Prize back in 1994. So there's a really kind of impressive track record as a poet behind him. But this morning, Conor's here to talk to Books for Breakfast about his new second novel, We Are Not in the World. And if I just take the book from under the toaster, just to show, okay, We Are Not in the World. And it's a remarkable achievement. It's a novel of rare power and emotional punch. It tells the story of a father, a daughter, a lover. And much of the action takes place in a HGV truck making its way from England through France. And that critical yet mysterious journey is what sucks us into the narrator's world as he struggles to come to terms with his life. And I know, Conor, you have a passage to read to us from the book to get us in the mood for it. Isn't that right?
I do. Will we start with that, Peter?
So we'd start with that.
Okay, so this is there's an initial conversation, and then there is the point at which they're about to disembark the ferry at Calais. The cargo door opens. It opens incrementally. It falls forward away from us into foreign day. There are men down there, stevedores in high-vis and hard hats, shouting to one another. I rotate the ignition to halfway to check for evidence of light. The instrument panel flashes and falls still. There are chains. There is shrieking of iron like gates of hell. Then this fluorescence gradually floods the floor between us and creeps forward and feels warm. We've been in black this past half hour. We've been blathering the glossolalia that she and I have been wont to blather years now. Lovely, hollow soap bubbles blown in one another's faces. Me up front, her in the bunk at my back. We've come this far without anyone knowing that she's in here with me. Now this square of extravagant light at the far end of the hold, and people shouting, and distant semaphore, and hundreds of engines revving at once. I love this. You always say that, she says. Did I say that? Increasingly, I can't tell the difference between what I think and what I say. And she has spent so long with me alone that she has a hard time not responding to those things I think only. You always say you love this, she says, this moment when. She remembers right. American high school holidays gave us 2 uninterrupted months back in Ireland. A few of those summers weary of extended rain and family, we rented a camper van and toured the continent. Of every ferry crossing, when she and I and her mom were still an item, this was my favourite bit. The cargo hold opening and men bellowing above the roar. All the vehicles starting up and sidling out in lines and separating into a whole continent of heat. The way blown dandelion seed scatters in hundreds and thousands on the wind.
Thanks very much, Conor. That was great. I think that passage, it seems to me, it has all the elements of what makes this novel such a fascinating read. I mean, you have that evocation of the world of the cargo truck and the men and the truck itself and the character of the man driving it. And it's, in some ways, it's like there's a disconnect. It's like he's no ordinary truck driver. And, and then you have this kind of the particular nature of the relationship with the daughter, that Los Olali, as you say, this kind of private language that they have, and that closeness. And I thought maybe we might start with the truck, because we're on this. The novel comes to us really as that journey, and we're not entirely sure of the reason, or the ultimate kind of destination. But that world, I mean, the truck world, the world of roll-on, roll-off ferries, the open road, the kind of ruche, the cafes, car parks, the undesired for Paddy, the main character, that undesired for camaraderie that he has to confront. It's all brought to life with great intensity. So it's the word you know a little bit about. I mean, did you have to do a lot of research?
I did a fall scheme in Dundalk many years ago, and part of the thing that they obliged me to do was to do a supplementary training course. And I, out of some kind of youthful arrogance, said, I'm not doing a supplementary course. And they said, you have to do a supplementary course. And I said, okay, I will do eeny, meeny, miny, moe, I'll do trucking. So I did trucking. And I actually really loved it. This was like in 1993. And I actually passed my first test at it. I got class 1, what used to be called fixed axle, but is now called rigid. So I had that on my license for years. I had some kind of daft romantic idea that I would actually use this license and maybe travel down and become a continental haulier. Being a writer, I never did that. This is what writers do. In lieu of experience, we actually write about the idea of the experience. So I do know what it feels like to sit on the top of a truck. It's an extraordinarily powerful beast, and they're almost like mythological creatures that you sit up there. And I think what, really attracted me about the truck is the sense of being somewhere and not being at the same time. So these father and daughter, they drive through France. They're kind of there and not there, really. You can be in a truck, you're driving through Provence, and you're not really there. Nobody sees you, and you don't really engage with the landscape, and you don't really engage with the local community or anything like that. So it has this kind of marvelous sense of being present and being absent all at the same time.
Yeah, actually, that was my next question, because I was very interested in that aspect of it. That the France that we see in this journey is not maybe the France that we might know. I mean, it's a series of road stops and hard shoulders and car parks. And you've said that you like these kind of what you call liminal spaces, places that are really non-places. And I was just wondering, what is the attraction of those liminal spaces for you?
I think there's something weirdly sublime about those spaces, those kind of after hours, in between spaces, motorways, service stations, supermarket car parks after everybody has gone home. I think there's really something maybe my imagination is perverse like this, but I find them something incredibly beautiful, and it moves me far more than writing about traditional versions of landscape, trees, lakes, and all of that stuff. I actually find that version of landscape extremely inspiring. I was really influenced by Ethna Jordan, the painter Ethna Jordan has a series of paintings of France, and they're like that. They're really kind of paintings of a prettified or beatified version of France. It's really kind of plain. She writes about flyovers, she paints flyovers, she paints motorways, she paints all these kind of strange in-between spaces. And I used to have postcards in my flat in Manchester that I had of her paintings. And I found those really inspiring. And I suppose on some level, those paintings kind of insinuated themselves into the fabric of my novel.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think because that focus on these spaces as well, I think adds greatly to the intensity, because you're in that confined space, so you're also, I suppose, you're in Paddy's head for a lot of it. And I mean, for instance, I mean, like, apart from that actual physical journey through France, there's lots of side journeys in the novel as well. I mean, you're going back in time to the life before the truck. We're going back to Paddy's childhood by the sea on the east coast of Ireland, back and forth between America, England, and Ireland, the breakup of his marriage and the travelling that's necessitated by the affair that he has. And he's a kind of Oisin travelling back and forth between the lands of youth and despair. You keep pulling in that link. He grows up.
Sorry, I was just
Yeah,
most obsessed with that story. I heard that
yeah,
as a kid. And I suppose the aspect of the story that always absolutely obsessed with me was this idea of the space between Tirnanog and Ireland. So we are told in the story that Oisin gets on his magic steed that Niamh gives him and rides back from this mythical land of youth to Ireland. And even as a kid, I was absolutely obsessed with this space between Ireland and Tirnanog, between this
yeah,
actual place and this mythical place. And what did that look like? And
yeah.
you know, what kind of terrain was Oisin riding across? So I suppose, yes, I do incorporate that into the novel, the myth of Oisin, and I was definitely trying to update that idea of Oisin on the horse and this guy Paddy in France, this HGV lorry.
Because he gets at this one point where he gets down out of the cab, and he suddenly feels ancient. It's a total moment from that myth. But I was wondering as well, because it fits in, or it goes along with this other sort of a sense of homesickness that runs throughout the novel as well. I mean, there's a huge sense of homesickness. The boy at school, he's homesick for his home and his mother. Same when he goes to university. And throughout his life, he's plagued by the sense of kind of never being in the right place or the right life. And at one point he says, I've lived my whole adult life with this floor of underlying homesickness, a homesickness born of absence. I mean, that's sort of one of the ideas that you're kind of pursuing or interested in pursuing.
Yeah, I mean, I've lived outside of Ireland, Peter, since 2004. I think exile is probably a very glamorous term. The poet Amy Grennan once said to me that we are, in fact, just commuters, really. But exile is a much more romantic and richer term. I do think, and I think one of the things that attracts me about the Oisin story is that it is a sort of dystopian narrative of exile. It is the way that when you leave your home, you kind of think that your home is still there waiting for you. And then you go back and you realize that more time has passed than you actually have experienced, and that your home has changed beyond recognition. I felt that particularly in the high years of the financial crash, when I would go home from Manchester to Ireland, and Ireland was going through a particularly rough time, like around about 2010, 2011, and it was quite dystopian. My hometown was pretty much closed down, and I do remember walking around, maybe sort of self-glamorizingly thinking of myself as Oisin, going back after 300 years from the land of youth and realizing home actually hasn't stayed intact. It hasn't waited for you any more than the past waits for you. It doesn't sort of sit there waiting for your return.
Okay. I was struck. I mean, one of Enda's questions to Laura was about the different kind of range of voices and styles that she applied, and I was just wondering, one of the aspects of your novel as well is that, there is this great passionate affair in it with the woman that he meets when he's applying for a university job, and it's this kind of deeply, almost kind of frenetically sort of sexual affair. It's almost like a litany of trysts kind of around the place, and you'd use a kind of different. Like you use sort of the second and third person, so the woman becomes you and Paddy is he. And again, as in the kind of asking Laura that question, I'm interested in the question, in the kind of thinking, I suppose, behind that kind of almost distancing stylistic device.
Yeah, I suppose if nothing else, I am a demon for symmetry. And I like that sort of perspectival symmetry of one section being I and she, and then the other section being you and he. I thought there was a lovely kind of balance to that. I did like the interim perspective of the second person to recount in reverse order this fairly explicit love affair. Is it him addressing her, telling her about her experience, or is it her referencing her own experience in the second person in that sort of colloquial way that we do, that we don't refer to ourselves in the first person, we refer to ourselves in the second person. I like the way that it sits kind of somewhat tantalizing between those two interpretations of the perspective. There is also a French movie by the filmmaker François Ozon, 5x2, 5 times 2, that essentially, and this is what writers do, we all do, nicked it, you know. It's 5 movements in reverse order of a love affair where they say goodbye for the last time in the first section that we see them, and then in the final movement they meet for the first time. There is a great attraction, I think, to that reverse order narrative that it gives us. It inherently provides us with a happy ending, even though we realise that that happy ending is essentially a false happy ending. Harold Pinter does it brilliantly too with, what is the movie? No, Betrayal. About his...
it's fantastic, yeah.
Bakewell, I think. God, I shouldn't, but I mean that's what it's about. And I think he actually spoke about this. So yes, but it is the same thing. It's an illicit love affair, and it's a backwards narrative. And I saw a production of Betrayal in the Crucible in Sheffield, and I was just absolutely blown away by it. And it was actually the first time that I had seen Pinter live on stage, and I was really interested in this way that the characters on stage seem to be talking repeatedly at cross purposes with each other. That there are two people there in the room and they're sort of conducting separate conversations all the time. And I said to my English wife, what the hell? And she said, that's just being English. That's the way we speak to each other. We sort of speak in parallel or at different tangents and pretend that we're all engaged in the same conversation. So I was very influenced by all of those different things. But I think everybody does that when you write a book, that you pull in all of these different facets.
It's a very style. I mean, I suppose this will be my last question before the Toaster Challenge. I mean, it's a novel of. I mean, it's a novel of great style, I think, and I know you'd reject the notion of a poet's novel, but there does seem to me to be a kind of continuity between your writing as a poet and your writing here, in just that the kind of exactness, the dwelling on what it's possible to do with language. And so I'm just wondering, did the poetry help the novel, I suppose, is the question, or is that a completely separate domain of activity?
I don't think of it as a separate domain at all. To be honest, Peter, I've not written a poem for 5 years, and it's not really that I sort of became disenchanted with poetry. It was just that, I think stylistically and in terms of thematic ideas, it extended into a longer form. I got frustrated with the confines of the lyric poem, and one of the things that I really like about the novel is that it gives you space to think the next thought and then the next thought after that, and to pursue these ideas to their logical conclusion. No, I actually think you're right in some respects. There is a sort of thematic continuum between the poems and the prose. They do dwell on these kind of liminal spaces. They do always dwell on, ideas of home, of the retrieval of home and the loss of home, and lots of sex.
Yeah.
Have loads and loads. I mean, this is. I mean, honest. You know, I used to have loads and loads of sex in my poetry. Nobody ever noticed. And then now I publish a novel that has loads of sex in it, and everybody says, "Oh my God, you've got loads of sex in it." And I said, "Well, I've been doing this for years, for God's sake." So when you say that you loved my poetry, you didn't actually notice the sex at all.
Well, I think you've just upped the sales now. I think Gallery Press will be delighted. I think there'll be a run. There'll be a run on the poetry as well as this novel. But can I just say, well done on it's a terrific novel, a terrific read, and I hope you're up now for the toaster challenge after that. So I'm really looking forward to hearing you talk about the book that you've chosen. So we have the bread is ready, the toast is ready to go down, and so let's hear it. And so we go 1, 2, 3, off you go.
Okay, so the book I've chosen is The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which is a book that I heard about for a long time. I heard loads of other writers speaking about in glowing terms. I read the reviews when it came out initially. I didn't read it when it came out first. I read it as recently for the first time in 2018. I was actually down in the south of France writing the novel that is just now published. And I picked off the shelf, and I actually stole from my friends this copy of The Road by Cormac McCarthy. There are, I think, a handful of books that you read in your life that are kind of life-changing. One of those books, I thought to myself, how extraordinary this is. It's so rare that we encounter a writer who is really genuinely trying to write great literature. It's not this apologetic, mealy-mouthed sort of halfway house approach to writing. He is actually genuinely trying to write a great book that's a really spare narrative about a father and a son in this kind of near future dystopian landscape who are simply travelling down a road to try and get to the sea. And that's basically all the story is about. It's a completely simple linear narrative where they travel down this road, or they sort of disappear into forests and camp in forests at night, and they protect one another and they survive as best they can. They encounter all manner of hair-raising experiences, including lots of brushes with what appears to be cannibalism. I say that, it doesn't sound like a lovely book. It is, a profoundly frightening book. But Cormac McCarthy, for anybody who knows his work, is probably the most profoundly brilliant stylist living. He is a great, great writer. And for all of, the brutality of the landscape that he's describing, the prose is absolutely symphonic. It is incredibly beautiful. And more than anything, the book is, I think, a profound meditation on the human spirit, the instinct of survival in the human spirit. And it is also, I think, a meditation on that profound instinct that we have as parents to protect our children in a way that we don't have in relation to anybody else in the world. This profound instinct to protect our children. And then at some point, without us realizing it, our kids become our protectors. So it is an incredibly bleak book, but it is also a really, really beautiful book. And I think fundamentally it is a profoundly uplifting book as well. If there's one book you ever want to read, even instead of mine.
That's great. That's brilliant, Conor. I mean, the toast is crisp, but not too burnt. But that was Conor OCallaghan talking about The Road.
Like the underdone people.
Yeah. The Road by Cormac McCarthy was published by Vintage. If anybody wants to go out and get it, and it is, as you said, it's a rare novel by a rare writer. It's a writer who's a kind of complete perfectionist as an artist, with that extraordinary kind of back catalogue. If you think of books like All the Pretty Horses and the rest of that trilogy, Blood Meridian, No Country for Old Men, he's a very kind of pure sort of writer, totally dedicated, complete refusal to do anything else in his life, including hanging around with writers.
The Road is a very spare book. It is, I think, far less lyrical in stylistically, and it's very spare and very sinewy, but incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
I actually still fantasize that I've written this book. I think it's the only book out there for a living like it. But I
Yeah.
think to myself, I'm going to read now from my latest one. As if
Yeah. I think we've all had those dreams where we think we've written amazing books. But so that's a great book and a great writer to end with. So thanks again, Conor, for talking to us about Cormac McCarthy's The Road. And of course, all the details of the books we'll be discussed will be available on booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com as well.
So, I don't know, Peter, sadly, I think we've reached the end of this special video podcast of Books for Breakfast for Mountains to Sea Festival 2021. We'd really like to thank our guests this morning, writers Laura McKenna and Conor OCallaghan, for joining us at the breakfast table to talk about their new novels, We Are Not in the World, published by Doubleday, and Words to Shape My Name from New Ireland. And also, I'm going off now, I think, looking up Betrayal by Harold Pinter, Andre Brink, Cormac McCarthy. We've had great discussion this morning. Just to say as well, if you haven't got copies of their books, we do highly recommend both books. So do go out and purchase them and read them and really enjoy them. And we want to say as well, thanks to you for listening. We're off to have some more coffee to enjoy more of the events that this wonderful festival has to offer. And if you do wish to listen again to an audio recording of this event, it will be available as a podcast, an audio podcast, on booksforbreakfast.buzzsprout.com. So thank you, everyone, and enjoy your weekend. Bye.
Bye.